might be afraid that newly freed slaves would compete with them for jobs. Also, while we are correct in considering slavery unjust, Southerners who took up arms for the Confederacy saw themselves as engaged in a fight for their own freedom rather than a fight to protect slavery. The truth is, when it comes to fighting, motivation is a very tricky business, and I'm most comfortable agreeing with James McPherson, who argued that motivation waxes and wanes with victory, and that the outcome of the war was contingent on a number of turning points. And we're just going to discuss two of the most important, July 1863 and August 1864. July 1863 saw two of the most important Union victories in the whole war. In the Western Theater, General Grant laid siege to and captured Gettysburg, Mississippi, thus giving the Federals control of the lower Mississippi River. I mean, by then the North already had New Orleans, which made it pretty much impossible for the Confederates to ship cotton or anything else along the Mississippi River. After that, Grant was able to turn his attention to the east with the aforementioned hammering of the enemy and their resources. More famously, especially in the eastern part of the United States, the first 3 days of July 1863 saw the Battle of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. This was General Lee's furthest major offensive in the North, and had he won the battle, it is likely that panic would have set in places like Philadelphia and maybe even New York. Actually, panic did overcome New York in draft riots that killed more than 100 people and only ended after troops from Gettysburg were called in. I'm not going to go into detail about either of these battles, but they shifted the tide of the war in favor of the North, although not...
So, this is important about these two battles because a lot of people often think the Battle of Gettysburg is what won the war for the North. Not exactly. So, first of all, there were two battles that were essential at this point. Up until this point, Lee and the South had been on the offensive. They had actually been pushing the North back. So the North was not looking good. And Lincoln was becoming very unpopular because, like, how can you lose to the Southerners when you have this many resources? So, at this point, two battles changed the tide of war. One was the Battle of Vicksburg, which completely cut off the supply from the Mississippi River. Now, why would that devastate the South? What does a river do as far as supplies? Okay, transports them, right? So if you cut off those supplies, the Southerners can't do anything. They can't get their guns, they can't get their ammo, they can't get their food. And once they did that, that's something choked off the South. Now the other thing that Gettysburg did, the other battle, was it forced the South to go on the defensive, pushing them back. So now, they were doing this, and they get cut off in 2 points, and now this is happening. The North is coming in again. So, while it did not win the full war still continued after Gettysburg, it shifted the tide in Northern favor, meaning now they could go on the offensive. And it's after this that you see Sherman being unleashed on the South, and essentially just being like, do what you gotta do to win. And because at that point, Lincoln was like, okay, we've got to end the war now. So I think he'll talk about
enough to bring the war to a quick end. The Confederate forces would never again threaten a northern city. August 1864 saw another turning point that really spelled the doom of the Confederacy, and that was when Union General Sherman took Atlanta. Atlanta was a railroad hub and manufacturing center, but its capture was more significant politically than militarily because it happened close to the election of 1864. And that American election was really the last time that the Confederate States of America could have won the Civil War. It's easy to forget this, but Lincoln actually had to run for re-election during the Civil War, and by the summer of 1864, the war was pretty unpopular, and it looked like Lincoln might lose. The capture of Atlanta changed public opinion about Lincoln, and it meant that his Democratic opponent and former top general, George McClellan, didn't stand a chance of winning, which was really significant for the war, because Lincoln was committed to ending it with a Union victory, and McClellan, I think it says a lot about American history, that in the end, the war's outcome was ensured not just by military victories, but by a political one.
And this is why, what we talked about earlier, while the Southern strategy of let's move the war into the election was a good idea, it might have worked, what killed it? You just talked about it. Who won the election? Lincoln won the election. They lost their chance, which means they'd have to go for at least another 4 years into war. There's no way the South can handle that. They can't go that long. So it's at this point that the South has pretty much realized we've lost, we're done. There's nothing we can do. So it wasn't necessarily any one battle that ended the war exactly. It was the fact that the tactic of extending into the election and then hopefully getting a bit of a foothold never worked. So all of their options were pretty much hindered at this point.
Effects of the Civil War and the enduring questions that have arisen out of it, such as who exactly freed the slaves. But until then, thanks for watching.
Okay, alright, so how do you feel about the video you watched in terms of like the history of it? I mean, is there anything you didn't know or just thought was interesting?
I didn't know that Lincoln had to rerun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You would think he would automatically be allowed, but I mean, he was still an American president. He still had to follow the rules of the U.S. Constitution. So what's interesting is that even though most of the southern states had seceded, meaning they did not consider themselves part of the U.S., they still put up a candidate for election as if they could run against the president, and he still went with it. So I always thought that around, but I love that McClellan was his opponent. I'm like, really? You're going to pick the guy who didn't do anything at all and was famous for not doing stuff? So yeah, it's one of those interesting bits of history. I never understood. I'd have to go back and reread why they thought McClellan would be an effective candidate. All right, so that being said, let's move on to our Jeopardy round. I think since there's 4 of us, we can just do, you want to do individuals or do you want to do team of 2? Team of 2? 2 teams? Okay. Are we okay with this split, or do y'all like want to partner up? You have specific partners you want to pick? You can turn the light on. Like in my eyes.
I'll take another, but I don't think I'll read it.
Well, I appreciate that. That would be nice if you did. All right, so Hannah, you okay with partnering with CZ?
I really don't care.
You don't care? All right. So you seem very excited today. So.
Still have to sleep.
I'm sorry. All right, so we'll do team 1, team 2, and we're gonna get through this, and then when we're done with this, we will pretty much end on that and go with watching the scene from Lincoln, which will then turn the camera off because of copyright issues. All right, so let's see. Let's let team 1 pick first.
Can you true or false 300?
True or false 300? Let's do it. According to Johnson, Lincoln was passionately in love with his wife, Mary Todd. This is all the textbook.
It's false.
It is very false. So, well, it's not very false. He loved her, I think, in his own way, but Mary Todd, especially after, well, she actually lost one of their sons. That he had died. I can't remember exactly how he died. I think it was sickness or something. But she had basically kind of gone off the deep end. And so his wife was, I think he actually was trying to have her committed several times. I don't know if he succeeded, but she was way off. So I think he loved her in his own way, but they were not very happy together. So she blamed him for the loss of the son, and he just, was getting tired of her. So yeah, we love Lincoln, but he wasn't perfect. All right, so team 2, you got it right?
Lecture 300.
Lecture 300. The Civil War was won and lost in the Western theater.
True.
Let's see. True, very true. So I actually have a map. I might show you all a bit later after this, if you remind me, but a lot of people get Western and Eastern theaters mixed up because it's really weird how it looks on a map. Like you've got, the Eastern Coast, and technically most of the major fighting happened along the East Coast, so you think it's all Eastern. No, there were some battles that were slightly west, so it's called the Western Theater, and then up here in the north, there was the Eastern Theater. So it's really corkscrewed and it's confusing, and yeah. But the majority of the battles and the majority of the action is going on in the Western Theater, and most of the significant battles, I think with the exception of Gettysburg, happened in the Western Theater, so that's where most of it was happening. Alrighty, so good job, Team 2, right? Want to try that again?
True or false 400.
Oh, I thought you were going to cut a line across the thing.
Oh, okay. And then not 300.
No, too late, we already said it. General Lee was a forceful and powerful leader who did not hesitate to give explicit orders or shy away from confrontation.
False.
There, very good.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just had to get it up before the
That's fine, that was close. So, but I will say it is false, although gingerly false, because the thing about Lee is he was a brilliant general, very intelligent, very smart, and like the guy said earlier, he was winning the war for a while. But after a while, he started second-guessing himself, and it led to several mistakes, one that Grant took advantage of, and unfortunately cost Lee in Gettysburg. Actually, it's very possible that Lee could have won Gettysburg, and I'm trying to remember, there were 2 divisions he should have pushed forward that he didn't, and because of that, the Union was able to hold out and actually win for reinforcements to come. So had Lee actually gone through with it, he probably would have won Gettysburg. All right, team 1.
North or south 300.
North or south 300.
I know this answer.
The battle which took place at Pittsburgh Landing in 1862 between A.S. Johnston and Ulysses S. Grant began as a resounding victory for the South, but ended as a devastating rout the next day. So this battle, it's a bit of a long question, I'll repeat it. This battle, which took place at Pittsburgh Landing in 1862 between A.S. Johnston and Ulysses S. Grant began as a resounding victory for the South, but ended as a devastating rout the next day.
You were just talking about this, but I literally don't remember the name at all.
I have no idea.
Do you give this point to guess?
I'll tell you what, just to make it fun for this, I won't do point deductions for this one. I'd like y'all to guess on these because this is a little more fun.
I'm gonna guess Vicksburg, but I'm not 100%.
Okay, does anyone want to counter that? I'll give the points to whoever gets it right if they get it right.
The Battle of Vicksburg.
Yeah.
Vicksburg?
Yeah, Vicksburg.
Okay, let's see. Battle of Shiloh. Yep, you've probably heard of it. There is a Shiloh, Georgia, but that's not where this battle took place as far as I remember. There's like 2 or 3 different Shilohs and it wasn't, but there is a Shiloh, Georgia too. I might be wrong, it might have been the one in Georgia. I remember Chickamauga being one of the ones in Georgia. Alright, okay, so team 2, maybe y'all pick this time.
Figures of war thing.
Yes.
Figures of war. Oh, man. Well, it's messed up now because
Oh,
you
no,
got
we-
this thing, so OCD's taking it.
On grab bags. On grab bag.
What we need to do is do this, and this, and then it'll be
Exactly.
So,
Who's cares?
alright, Figures of War 300. This northern minister proved to be incredibly adept at gun running. True story. Minister. Yeah, he's a pastor. Northern pastor was really good at running guns. So I won't be surprised if you don't know this one. He's not very well known.
The Pope. I don't know.
Yeah. We can skip this.
Yeah, we don't know.
Okay. This one in question was Henry Ward Beecher. Henry Ward Beecher. So, yeah, and he's not as well known. So, all right, so we're doing grab bag.
Yes.
Everyone's like, yes, definitely cut it in half. All right, this college was founded as the first institution to admit both black and white students, and I believe it's still around today, actually.
It was.
Pretty sure it's still around today. My can is but one person. Like, I know this.
I know it. I read it. I know I read it. I don't remember the name. I don't think I remember. Crap.
You want to take a guess? Remember, you don't lose points to this one. So, and I'll let y'all counter it. See.
No, I really don't know. There's just like, too many colleges in my mind because we've read so many. I started.
I'll give you a hint. It wasn't UGA or Georgia Tech. Or Georgia Southern.
Are you insinuating that it's in Georgia?
No, there wasn't any of those. I can tell you that. I'm giving you hints.
If it wasn't Georgia Southern, it would be Georgia One.
It wasn't Hawaii Tech either. Or Alaska Tech. Those states weren't even around.
Was it Harvard?
Oxford?
Alright, so you want to guess Harvard?
I want to guess Harvard.
Oxford is in Britain, but you guessed. It's not in the United States.
I don't know, you're just thinking what rich colleges.
So you're saying Harvard, you're saying...
I don't know. I just.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to show it? Alright. So it is Oberlin.
Oh, I knew that.
Oberlin College. They're still around. They have a team, I think, football team. So yeah, it's still around. Alrighty. I'll give team 1 the pick this time.
Right back 400.
I knew it. Yes! Cece's got my back. Alright, this purchase made the Southern Transcontinental Railroad geographically possible. So this purchase made a Southern Transcontinental Railroad route geographically possible.
Louisiana purchase?
Anyone want to counter that one?
Probably
not.
Wait, Virginia?
I'm waiting.
It wasn't that one. I know it wasn't that one.
Well, he mentioned this in the video, didn't he?
I don't know.
He did mention the railroads in there. I don't remember if he mentioned the purchase.
I know it wasn't. I'm like, it's like on the tip of my brain.
How
How many purchases are there? I should know this.
I only knew.
There's so many
There's so
purchases. The United States loved buying land. That was one of our big things.
But how many were like this popular? Like,
You know how much we got? You know how much we got Rhode Island for when we bought it?
How?
$24.
$24.
We bought the entirety of Rhode Island from a Native American chief for $24.
It's actually tiny.
Not that tiny. It's still a big island. It's still a state now. We bought it for $24. So
You couldn't get a sheet of paper for $24, like.
yeah. And back then, $24 was a lot of money, but still, that's like essentially spending like maybe no, not even 1,000 a day. I would say like maybe $500 and you now own a state. I would buy that. So yeah. All right. All right. So you're saying Louisiana Purchase.
I don't know, but I know it's not.
I know it's not that
Yeah.
either.
Okay,
No,
let's
it's
see.
not, but
So in this case, the Gadsden Purchase. The Gadsden
it's not
Purchase.
what I was thinking.
You might want to keep that one in mind because you might see it on your quiz. So, alrighty, Team 2, you want me to?
How many kids?
Should we make a face?
No, I'm
Like
thinking
the two lines over the lecture.
Like a frowny face?
Lectures are
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So lecture 100.
Lecture 100? The destruction wreaked in the South was something unprecedented in world history.
True.
No.
Well,
I was gonna say,
They didn't get it right.
Here's why, and what this question is referring to is that scorched earth policy that Sherman, but scorched earth was not something new in history. It's been done many times. Now, in the South itself, it was, but the strategy of it was not. So,
I didn't do that. That's one thing.
yeah, that's why you gotta be careful with those questions. It's a little tricky because you could argue that in the South itself, yes, it was unprecedented,
That's
but
what I was thinking,
not
sorry.
in history overall.
No.
So, Team 1?
Figures of World War.
Wait, figures of
Did you
World
just
War?
deduct points from Team 2?
Yeah, because you got to roll. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, it's not. I'm sorry. I'm so used to being mean. I didn't know. It's weird being nice. I like it. All right, figures of War 100.
I should have pointed that out.
Right?
Stonewall Jackson was accidentally shot and killed by one of his own men during this battle. I will give you a hint. It's also where the Red Badge of Courage is set. Same battle.
Oh, it was. Wait, I know this. Hang on. It was overhead.
We read that in literature.
Oh,
actually we did.
It was.
The Union general in this was Joseph Hooker, who did not have great strategy in Chancellorsville.
I want to say Gettysburg, but that's way, it feels like
We
it's
can-
too obvious. Yeah, no.
I don't think it is. It's the only battle I know.
Yeah.
Do it.
It's the only battle I know is battle.
Well, it's a 100 question, so it can't be that hard, you know.
It's not too bad. I might have given the answer away.
Can you give it away more?
That thing I said a little while ago, that's the answer. I just realized that I let it slip.
Yeah, was it? Wait, which one did you say? Was it Shiloh?
No,
No, it was something else.
I'll give you another hint. It begins with a C.
That's
Connecticut, I don't know.
It's the battle of the entire state of Connecticut, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know. What's that
We
to
can
say?
say that.
Okay, the Battle of Chancellorsville.
Yeah,
It's actually on Union
What
loss.
did you say?
So, despite Jackson losing his life in this battle, it was actually a Union loss. They lost this battle. And also, despite being the soldier, the main character in The Red Badge of Courage, who was a Union soldier. So, yeah. Alright, team.
Should we do like lecture 500
Lecture
or
500?
500?
That's
Or
not
just
north.
500 north and south?
No, lecture 500.
Lecture 500?
Because then we can go down and just make it a pattern.
Okay. The Western Theater was significantly larger than the Eastern Theater.
False. Did I get it wrong?
I was gonna say
It's true. Yeah, remember what I said? How like you had the Western Theater where most of the action was going in, it was like this big, and you had the Eastern Theater which was up here in its middle area.
So when you think it's
Yeah.
one, say the other.
You have to get it
Yeah.
right, and then you had to go
I can still win. I did it on purpose.
You would be losing if I was taking points away. Alright, team 1.
Figures of 4, 500.
Figures of War 500. This bishop from Louisiana joined the Confederate Army as a major general.
Is it the same bishop? No, that was
No.
Is this a person everyone knows or?
It's a 500 question, so I won't be surprised if you don't know.
Okay.
I forget this one too a lot. Because again, he's not particularly famous that I know of. I'll skip this one?
Yeah.
Okay. Leonidas Polk.
Oh.
Leonidas Polk, who ironically has the last name of a president and the first name of a Spartan king. So you'd think he would be super well known, but not really. Okay, so team 2.
Do you have to do the 100s now?
What does that make it?
Wait, the 200. We haven't touched the 200.
Yeah, 200.
So what do we do with the 200?
The 200 is on each, like, outside, and it's another pattern, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's the bottom part.
Yeah, because I don't. Well, no.
200.
Matt.
No, what is it?
It's a wood match.
Do we have
If it's
400 north or
go
south?
like this.
400 north and south.
Yeah, 400. Yeah, 400 north
Okay, 400 for North and
Yeah.
South? All right. Lincoln won this many of the deep southern states in the 1860 election.
Zero.
It is 0. He raised his hand, so I gotta give it to him. But yeah,
It was zero.
it was 0.
There's no possible way.
It was pretty much, he actually, on 10 of the states, he wasn't even on the ballot. So they didn't even, imagine, I think I talked about this last week, imagine if you're in a presidential election and you see 2 names on the ballot, you vote, and the next thing you see on the TV the next day is that some third guy you never even heard of won the presidency. It's like, wait, what? It's like, that made the South very mad. And it was the main reason why South Carolina seceded from the Union. Now, the rest of the states seceded about a few months later due to the war starting and all that, but South Carolina specifically was like, nope, we're done, we're out. Texas has threatened to do that multiple times in the last few presidential elections, particularly with the Democratic ones. Obama and Biden, I think Texas threatened to secede multiple times. So we'll see if they ever do. I don't think they will. I don't think they quite have enough. Enough popularity to do it. All right, team 1, I'll let you pick.
North or South 200.
Okay. It was in this state that what might be called the first bloodshed of the Civil War actually occurred. Now think about this question carefully, because we've talked about 2 locations that might be the right answer, but only one is actually the right answer. I know it was
Gettysburg.
No.
Literally the end. That's at the
Well,
end.
Gettysburg wasn't the end, but it wasn't
It
the
was
latter
at the
half.
end.
It was the latter half, yeah. Think about where a lot of the fighting started even before the war actually began. I'll give you a hint, it was called Bloody This.
Maryland?
No.
Massachusetts.
Think about one of the border states. Think about one of the border states between the North and the
Was
South.
it?
Bloody Delaware.
Not even close.
That's not one of the kids.
We talked about this. We talked about this.
What was it? Like, what's on the border? Was it like Virginia and like.
And then it
Virginia.
What is
And
it?
Tennessee. It was like Virginia, Tennessee, and then like, I don't know.
I feel I weep.
Is it Bloody Missouri? If it was.
Wait.
In this case, it was Bloody Kansas.
What?
Bloody Kansas.
I would have no idea.
Yeah.
We talked about that last time. Lawrence, Kansas, where most of the major, or not major, but a lot of the violence began was actually in Kansas. It was right in the middle between the slave and free states, and you had Northerners and Southerners moving into that state, constantly combating each other. The official start of the war was Fort Sumter, South Carolina, but you could argue that it was really